Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Taking the time out of your day to come listen to myself and Bob. Um, we'll do a round of introductions. I've got the ordering a little bit wrong on this agenda. We're going to go through some benefits and challenges that we see with a microservice type architecture. Then we're going to cover off an Octopus deploy overview, see where Octopus fits in to the microservice architecture. I'm going to go live with a demo and then take any questions afterwards. And I think Bob's got some stuff he wants to talk about around kind of versioning and decoupling services. So what I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. For all you who don't know me, I'm Adam Close, a solution engineer here at Octopus Deploy, and I roped Bob into this session today a couple of days ago to come give you his knowledge on release orchestration. So hi, hey Bob, yeah, thank you for doing this last minute with me.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. I love talking about this stuff. In fact, you're going to be using one of the steps that I wrote, so I
Yeah,
figured it would be a good chance for me to talk about this. I think you're
yeah.
doing yourself a bit of a disservice, Adam, because it's a senior solutions engineer, not
Oh
just
yes, I
solutions
know.
engineer. I don't know if yeah. So Adam
It's
was recently
very new.
promoted. Yeah,
Yeah, I say very new recently. I think within a week. So I'll update that for next time. And
yeah.
it's funny you should say that. So Bob wrote one of the step templates I'm going to use in the demo, and I kind of got to the point of building that in the demo. I was like, I'm going to reach out to Bob here, and then coincidentally, he's now on the webinar with me.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I had a lot of strong opinions to talk about, so I'm excited to do this. Definitely do this webinar with you, Adam.
yeah, because we've done something similar in the past, haven't we? We did the
Yeah,
better release orchestration in the past. So
yeah.
yeah, we're going full circle. So I want to kick us off and talk about some of the key benefits of microservices. So, traditionally you'd have your monolithic application that would contain kind of, I think, all the kind of parts of an application are grouped together. For example, you may have different types of APIs all built into one product, and essentially that, in terms of like kind of the DevOps world, it's relatively simple. You just deploy that one monolithic application to a Windows server, and there are some benefits to moving over to a microservice type architecture. And what that means is kind of splitting up or decoupling your monolithic application into different services. So, for example, let's say you have a financial application, you might take the invoice service and have that as a service, an API. You might have a customer API, a web app, all split out into different services. And why do people do this? Firstly, improve scalability, better fault isolation, and faster time to market. And when I say scalability, what I'm talking about there is, okay, let's say there's one part of the app that gets used a lot at a particular time of day or a particular time of year or month. Rather than scaling all of the application and consuming more cloud resources or on-premise resources, just scale the part of the application that needs to be scaled. And then with that as well, when you've split up your monolith application into kind of microservices, there's just a faster time to market. So rather than deploying this big monolith application that could take hours, only deploy the things that that have changed and giving you the faster time to market. As well as kind of getting your applications out there faster, I always think I'm quite passionate about this one, Bob. It's not just about how quickly you can get your applications out there. When something goes wrong, how rapid can you restore those services? Do I have to then deploy the whole application again to fix that issue, or can I just fix the issue where it lives in the where it is in the application and just deploy that, giving us faster recovery services?
Oh yeah, I mean it's always about getting the change set to be as small as possible. And so
Mhm.
microservice is just a natural evolution of doing that. It's keeping their change sets again as small as possible, and then being able to push even a smaller fix out. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that as well, because as someone who's broken many things in production, the faster I can get it back out there, the faster I can sign off and get back on with my day.
Yeah, definitely. You can see that. You'll see that in my demo. Some of my pipelines that I've broken, and I managed to get them fixed pretty quickly with the microservice architecture. And then the first thing I want to talk about is something that Bob mentioned to me a couple of days ago. Each microservice can be programmed in any language and run on any platform. I typically think, okay, I've got these bunch of microservices. They'll all go into AKS, EKS, Azure Container Service, or they'll be all Azure functions. That's not necessarily true. And Bob kind of reminded me of that. That one service might best be running inside Kubernetes, another might be an Azure function. That does come with problems itself. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I didn't really think about that until we chatted the other day, Bob.
Yeah, and I honestly, I really wasn't thinking about that either until we did more of a deep dive into Octopus Cloud a little while ago, and it was a really good reminder of that because we have the Octopus website, and that's running as an Azure web app. But then we have a bunch of backend services that's running as Azure functions, and then we have Octopus Cloud itself. Each instance is running on Kubernetes, and so we just have this multi-tiered, multi-application host. So it was basically what is the best tool to host this particular application? Because sometimes it makes a lot of sense to host it on an Azure function or an AWS Lambda.
Yeah, we have all these services available to us. Let's take advantage of them. Let's not just be kind of beholden to one service. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit more some of the challenges that brings it in on the next slide. But then lastly, microservices help you reduce the cloud spend, especially when we talk about the scalable isolated services. So where I mentioned, okay, you may have one service that gets hammered at a certain time of day or month. Think about a big event that might be happening for a year. Black Friday, these retail stores where the e-commerce side of things will be kind of the utilization of those will be really high at certain points at certain times of the year. And rather than scaling the whole application, they can just go and scale the part of the application they need, in turn reducing that cloud spend. So with that, I had a nice GIF, but I'm sure we can all kind of we all know what he's saying. But with great power comes great responsibility, and we now need to talk about some of the challenges microservices brings to not only to developers, to DevOps engineers, to platform engineers, to release managers, to C-level. These challenges get felt across the whole business. And the first one we'll talk about is the increased kind of operational complexity. And I could mention hundreds of points on this. But when we think about one monolithic application, that could potentially turn into 15 services. Those 15 services turn into 15 pipelines. And then everything else is n plus 15. You break down your second monolith application, you're up to 30 services. 30 services equals 30 pipelines. Somebody's then got to manage those pipelines and get them deployed out to wherever they need to be. It's certainly a change of pace going from monolithic to microservices. And then you've got your production kind of orchestration overhead. So, okay, let's say a sprint has finished. You made a number of changes to different services. How do you know which ones can go out to production? You've then got a release manager coordinating which services can be deployed. Some people may go straight to production. Not everybody can do that. Me and Bob have had lengthy chats on, organizations that can go straight to production and some that need that kind of release orchestration. And that can become a challenge when it comes to microservices. And then the reduced visibility. When we think about a monolithic application, hey, Bob, what version is that application on? Oh, it's 2.0.1. When you think about a microservice, when it's all the services have been split out, you kind of lose kind of what's been deployed into all your different environments, whether that be dev, test, or production. And then the last couple, kind of managing security controls. What I mean by that is each service, they all require different API keys for different external services. You have to think about, let's take Azure, for example, service principals. Can this service principal deploy this application to this Kubernetes cluster? There's so much more to think about, especially when it comes to security. And that should be on top of everyone's kind of mind when you're doing anything in software. And the last one I'll finish on is developer burden as well. So the developers haven't just got to think about which services can be deployed with other services. They've then got to think about, we talked about a second ago, where you don't just deploy all the services to one place. You might have some running in Kubernetes, some running in Azure Functions. You might have some, you might be using an Azure SQL database. The developers got to pick all that up and kind of learn all that, and that's a kind of heavy burden. I know I feel that at Octopus, Bob, when I'm doing a sample application. I felt it this week when I took this on and I started building it. I was kind of saluting anybody who manages a microservice type architecture, because there's so much to learn and to understand of all the different moving parts that are involved.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting thing to think about when you go down your microservice journey. This was something that I encountered years and years ago with microservices, where we were splitting up a big old monolith into many microservices, and we didn't think about a lot of the overhead and a lot of the extra release orchestration and everything that went along for the ride on top of that. And we didn't really have nor did we have a really good reason for splitting everything up into microservices at the time. It was just like, well, it's the thing to do. It's what everyone wants to do. But when we start thinking about it more, like, it didn't really work out for us at that particular point in time. But now, depending on the application that you're working on, it can make 100% to split up into microservices. We saw the same thing happen internally at Octopus, where we had an internal backend system, and we called it we call it a revolution, because we needed to split everything up, because there were core pieces of functionality that needed to be able to iterate and deploy much faster than some of the legacy pieces that we had sitting around. So again, when you go down this challenges, just be aware that these challenges exist, and do it. I guess do it for the right reasons. Don't just do it just because it's the coolest thing on the block to do, that type of thing.
Yeah, because you can easily generate yourself a lot more work, and the value you probably get from microservices, if you don't keep on top of these challenges, the challenges far outweigh the benefits that the microservice architecture is going to bring. I should have had a comparison here, but on my slide that you can see, somebody put in a huge jigsaw together. I like to think when I'm deploying a monolith application, it's like the kind of children's jigsaw you used to get. You kind of put the shapes into the right slot, and then when you think about microservice architecture and deploying those, it becomes a lot more challenging, and it's kind of piecing the larger puzzle together. And then, lastly, TLDR of these challenges: more services, more problems. So yeah. And if anyone who doesn't know me, most people will tell you this about me at Octopus. I'm a huge US Office fan, so I have to put a Michael Scott GIF in there.
Yeah, in fact, I think you just showed us the Office Lego set that you have.
I have it right here.
Yeah. So
cool. So yeah, Bob, over to you and microservices and coupling.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about microservices is that it definitely promotes loose coupling. What that means is that you can deploy applications or deploy your services independently of one another. So much so that the coupling of the microservices, they're not even aware of one another. And you can also see this typically occur when you do something with, say, Message Bus. That really promotes that. So you can drop a message on top of Message Bus or some sort of queuing system, and then have another service subscribe to that message or process a message off of that queue. And what this enables everyone to do is be able to deploy everything independently of one another. And you don't really have to worry about if I have any sort of downtime or anything like that. So having that loose coupling is great. But when we go to the next slide, we have a different type of coupling that we have to consider. And this is business rule coupling. So coupling can occur when you have some sort of business rule change. So I'm going to use internally Octopus Deploy Cloud or Octopus Cloud. We also have a license system that generates the license keys. And the two talk to one another, not directly, but using our service bus. So what we have is we have the Cloud Portal is a subscriber to the service bus. And we have the license system that is a publisher of a message to our service bus. And so we were encountering a particular situation that when one license change occurred, there was a specific kind of change that could occur, and it would require the instance to have to be reprovisioned for that change to be applied. And 99% of the time, it was perfectly fine to wait until the maintenance window. But every once in a while, we absolutely had to push that change out that very second, and we would get permission from the customer and say, yes, make that change right away. And we needed to be able to ignore the instance maintenance window. So we added that as a business rule. Both systems have to be updated at that particular point in time. And so that's what gives us a bit of a challenge when it comes to our deployments. So when we go to the next slide and we start talking about some of the deployment challenges, so all the components, they can be deployed completely independently of one another. And in fact, that's encouraged. That's the whole point of microservices. However, from a business point of view, what we want is we want all of the systems that are impacted to be deployed concurrently or within a few minutes of one another. And this is really to make sure that we can train our support folks and any customer-facing folks all in the same time, and they have the appropriate it behaves how we train them right away. It's not you're going to see this occur on this application on Tuesday, but then on Thursday, it's actually going to start working how you expect it to work. No, we need everything to be deployed right at the same time.
Yeah, I think that something I've kind of learned new on this session that I didn't quite understand that happened in the back end of Octopus. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that story, Bob.
Yeah. I think this is really where this story we're about to show, especially for the demo that you're going to show, it's really more along the lines of these are business rule changes that we're making. We could, theoretically, deploy these services independently, but it's like you said, it's at the end of a sprint, and we had a whole bunch of business rules that all changed, and now we need to promote that out to production, for example. And I think that should answer one of the questions that came through, like, what is the best strategy to roll out a release for all the microservices?
That's really that question now. Yep. Yeah, we could pick that up as well after the demo. Because I think we are covering. Yeah, that's what I'm going to be covering that in the demo. And like you said, you mentioned it's about that the orchestration piece of making sure that they are deployed together. When you think about just having single pipelines for each one, it becomes a real challenge, and it becomes down to the individual developer then to kind of run these pipelines and kind of have a checklist to double check which service is going to be deployed with another service. So that kind of leads me on to Octopus and why, kind of not just why we exist, but I'll start by covering kind of where Octopus fits in the DevOps landscape. And we can see here, Octopus is kind of best in breed deployment tool. So it kind of picks up where your build server or CI server finishes. So you have developers checking the code into the CI server, or into your Git repository. The CI server builds, tests, and packages that application and pushes that into Octopus, or Octopus pulls that from a Git repository. And Octopus then has kind of best-in-class deployments to whether you're deploying to Windows machines or Linux machines, platform as a service, Azure functions, or Kubernetes. And that's kind of where Octopus fits. And kind of why do we exist? Basic deployments are easy. And Bob, I'm sure you've seen a nice basic deployment like this. It doesn't last that long. We've got
no, it does not.
I've put DevOps engineer here, but you're gonna have a developer who's wrote the application, he's got a single application, he's deploying
Yep.
it into production, he's got a single script and to a single customer. It's very rare that it stays like that. Things scale. And
yeah, it's the classic right-click deploy if you're a .NET developer from Visual Studio.
Yes.
We're rarely did that was good to just get it up there, but after like I would say 5 or 6 iterations, when you actually start working with a team, you're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work at all, and we need to make this a bit more complex because we have a bit more things we have to worry about.
Yeah, definitely. And on this side as well, complex deployments are hard. So simple deployments are easy. Complex deployments get hard. And you can see the DevOps engineer here. It's starting to frown now. When we start adding more services to the application, there are more scripts, there are more custom scripts to run. And it's got to manage those services deployed into Kubernetes. But then it gets even harder as you grow and scale. We can see this DevOps engineer here now with the exploded head. And this was me at one point this week. Certainly at 1 in the morning when I couldn't get Kubernetes to work. That was definitely me, and I can attest to that. You're deploying all the application services out, and those services are going to grow and grow. You've still got those custom scripts that and custom pipes that you're running to deploy those. But you're not then just deploying to Kubernetes. Like we said, you may have a Azure function that you're deploying, so you've got the Azure database to think about. Then you may have potentially multiple customers to deploy to. If you have customers that require their own instance of your software, you've then got to think about not just deploying this application once, you've got to deploy it multiple times. And the more customers you onboard, the more pipelines you're going to generate when you have to do a production deployment. And that's kind of where Octopus comes in. Octopus kind of manages the release kind of orchestration piece around your microservices, and also manages all the deployments of your pipelines, whether that is to Kubernetes, to Azure Functions, and Azure Databases. One thing you'll notice, all those custom scripts have gone and replaced by kind of first-class features in Octopus Deploy. I was going back a slide. I had some timelines up there, going from time to deploy a service in a day. Then you multiply those services, it takes a week. You multiply those services and customers, it goes up to 2 months. We can get that down to a minute. Maybe I'm being generous at a minute. All depends on kind of what you're doing. But the idea is to make it a kind of not just a fast, but safe, controlled rollout to production. So, what I'm going to show you in the demo, I'm going to show you how to test changes in an isolated dynamic environment. Why am I showing that? That's show you how you can reduce developer burden by kind of taking away anything a developer has to do with the kind of backend service. In my case, it's Kubernetes. And then kind of reduce cost, time, and risk deploying new service versions to production. And then show you visibility of deployed microservices. So I'm going to jump into a demo. Let's all imagine it's Monday morning and you get a text from your boss. Morning, as you probably heard, we're expanding our services to our auto body management. We need to update our homepage ASAP. Got it. So it's going to be garage and auto body management now. Yes, can you make that change without affecting the entire application? Absolutely, we'll manage that through Octopus. I probably should note as well, we integrate with GitHub Actions and Octopus Deploy. Great, make it happen. We need that fixed ASAP. So I'm going to jump out of my slide deck and come into the application that we're deploying today. So I've got a sample application called Pitstop. And there are multiple different services in here that you can see. We've got the invoice service, notification service, customizer API. I want to change the kind of web app, the front end. I'm going to make a very simple change. I'm sure you guys don't want to watch me writing a bunch of code changes. I certainly don't want to do that and risk breaking the entire system either. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to change I'm going to change the view, change the index. So I want to change this to, I'll get my slide deck back up, carriage and auto body management. So a bit of change to one of my services in my microservice architecture. So I'm going to commit that. And what I want to do with this is I want to give the developer an isolated set of services that are pulled from main that he can test his changes in. So I do want to deploy all the services that make up this application. Bob, you give me, I think, you give me the idea of it's not just about testing isolation as well. If a developer has his own set of services, he can share that out for a preview to other members as well.
Yeah, this was something that I've run into myself personally. We were completely rewriting a user interface module, and we had our normal pipeline going, dev, test, stage, prod, and everything was working fine with that. And it was just normal work flowing through. Meanwhile, while we're doing this complete rewrite, I wanted to be able to get feedback from my business owner and our quality assurance person, our business analyst, designers, anybody. And so my options were either I would check in half finished changes into main, which I did not want to do at any point in time, but that was definitely an option, and having it hide behind a feature flag. The other option was I would basically stand up a copy of the website on my developer box, my laptop, and somehow get that all working and allow any sort of external access into the system. And that had its own challenges because it was really designed just for me to access that particular application. And the other problem that I'd run into is I didn't know when our business analyst or our business owner or our designer, when they would want to look at the latest version of the application. And so they would come on, and I would be in the middle of making a complete rewrite. And it's like walking into the surgery, and when someone's guts are all over the place, it's like, no, I'm halfway through it. I need you to look at it these set times. And so really what I wanted was I wanted to have this isolated environment to allow something like that so I could gather feedback. And having that capability to do something like that would have been really, really powerful, because this was not the only change that we were making. This is a pretty complex application, and we didn't want to have to step on everyone's toes. And so this was something that we started coming up with, where we would have these isolated environments for these particular branches, and they wouldn't live for very long. We're talking maybe a day or two, and then they would merge into main in happy days. But we just wanted to get feedback faster to know that we were on the right path.
Yeah, definitely. And also when it comes to kind of services now, when you think about Kubernetes, having to have a developer create his own Kubernetes cluster locally, in Azure, this is the burden. So what I'm going to do now, what you can see on screen, I'm going to create a new branch, and it's going to kick off my feature branch pipeline in GitHub Actions. Just to kind of give everybody a pre-warning, I was hitting some Docker Hub rate limit issues. So I'm going to pray to the good demo gods now. We're not going to bump into that, but just a heads up. Nothing I could do about that one, I'm afraid. So what I've done, I've created a new branch, update product name, proposed change. And I go to my actions now. We're going to see it's running this pipeline. If I jump into there, first of all, it's setting a version number for this particular change. It's creating a feature branch, and I probably should explain that. What that's doing is calling a runbook in Octopus deploy to go create me a namespace in my Azure Kubernetes service. And once it's created that, it's then going to start building all the Docker images. It's doing every single one of them that kind of matter to this service. It's pushing those. No, it's pushing those built Docker images up into Docker Hub, and then creating and releasing Octopus and deploying those out. So what we'll do, if we click into one of these, we can see it's logged into kind of Docker Hub. It's building a Docker image, and we're going to create a release in Octopus. We'll send some build information into Octopus and deploy that release out. So in a second, we should in Octopus, we'll start seeing the deployments happen. So we can see that. That's good. If I go to my Octopus dashboard now, what we can see, I've got full visibility of all the services that are deployed in development, test, and production. And it's kicking off this new feature branch to development, the update product name. So we'll see
Uh,
this.
yeah, I was going to say one thing I think that's kind of important to point out, and I don't know if anyone's picked up on this, is that the release number, we've added a pre-release tag that is the branch name.
Yeah,
So you're
yeah,
previously, I saw you had a branch name called add blank space. That was a feature branch name, and that was a
yeah.
pre-release tag on there. So this is a good way for us to see these individual feature branches. Now, what's cool about this approach is because you're using a namespace, you could, in theory, have multiple concurrent feature branches working on at the same time.
That's
And when
right.
you have larger development teams, that's absolutely critical because not everyone's working on the same feature branch. Some people could be working on bug fixes. Some people could be working on new functionality for one piece and new functionality for another piece.
Yeah, no, definitely. We can see that now. So if I'm now in my kind of development cluster. If I just kind of refresh this, we'll be able to see the
Could you zoom
namespace
in a bit
page.
on? Could you increase the font size on that? It's kind of coming in a little blurry. There we go.
Is that a little bit? Is that a little better? We can
Yeah,
see there
yeah.
the pitch top update product name, so we can see all the services that have been deployed. If I just filter that down, we can see all my services that have been deployed, and we're just kind of depending on the load balancer. If I just go into Octopus, we can see Octopus kind of deploying these each service. We go to the object status check. We can see a real-time update of what is actually deployed to Kubernetes. Bob, I've been in a situation lots of times when I've hit kind of deploy on a YAML. I don't really know what's happening in the back
Yeah.
end. And we want to present this information to people using Octopus deploy. If I jump in here, I was gonna. There we go. We've got an external IP address down. I'll just open that up, and we can see there. Made that change to Garage Auto Body. Hey Bob, I could send this to you. Part of Octopus, I could email it out to you. I could send it in a Slack notification. I can
Yep.
share that with the team, test it in isolation, make sure I'm happy with it, and it's all working. And in that case, I am. Everything looks good to me. Maybe do some capitalization on some of the words, but I'm happy with that for now.
Well,
So
that's the power of this is now you're able to have a whole copy of this application running, and you can
yeah,
see that, and you can see that in isolation like that. And this
yeah,
really, to me, it's kind of an interesting concept because by doing something like this, it almost negates the need for a test environment. If you just have, let's say for a second you
yeah,
had dev, test, stage, prod. Well, if you have a dynamic environment like this, or be able to spin this up dynamically like this, you really don't need like tests, so to speak. You would just need to have these dynamic environments in dev. And that's what QA can test against. And then really staging becomes kind of like that final more integration layer. So then really you just have
yeah.
integration and production at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll talk about why I've introduced a test environment
Oh yeah.
in just a second. But yeah, and also kind of as a developer, I didn't have to touch Kubernetes there. I hit
Yeah.
deploy. Obviously, just on the demo, I went into the cluster. I can pull the IP address back and use that. The developer doesn't have to go into Kubernetes. He makes his change, he creates his new branch, and he's got all his services. And I think for me, reducing developer burden, I'm quite passionate about that now, and I'll take that through with me in 2024 as well.
Oh yeah.
Um,
And anyone who isn't familiar with Kubernetes, I love it. It's fantastic. But to do your first deployment, I just think about everything that I had to learn because I was doing it using just a raw YAML file. I'm like, all right, what do I need to put in this
yeah,
raw YAML file? So you had to learn about namespace, you had to learn about pods, you had to learn about cluster IPs. I was doing databases, so I had secrets. So I had to worry, how do I do secrets? How do I do an ingress controller properly? What's the difference
yeah,
between an ingress controller and just like an ingress resource? And you just had to learn all of these things. So you basically had to front load all of this knowledge all of a sudden. And so by doing this, by providing something like this, you can offload a lot of that work. So while it's important to learn, you don't have to learn it all in an afternoon or in 1 week. and hope for the best type of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is why I love the rise of the platform engineering kind of movement right now. That are going to take a lot of that burden away from developers. I'm getting on a little bit, so I'll speed this part of the demo up. So I'm happy with this change, and I want to create a pull request, and I want to merge that into the main branch. I'll change that over to mine. And I'm going to do some naughty things here. And I'm not going to have everybody review my code, but at this point here, you'd have somebody review your code. And GitHub is certainly going to let me. GitHub's going to let me know now. So this merge is blocked. You know, I'll have to tick this and also tick the red merge pull request. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and confirm the merge again. And what it's going to do now?
It's definitely not an accident action. You know, it's not a oops.
No.
Oops, I didn't mean to hit that button. It's like you had to click 3 times.
yeah. And there'll be some people that will still blame the tool, probably me. But what's just happened now? It's kicked off my main application services CI. Now this is where the speed comes in. Okay, I don't want all those services deployed. I need to merge this with what's on the main pipeline. So what it's done is detected the changes to all my services. And for how I do that, I will share this this repository out after, so you can check out the pipelines that I've created. What we can see now is only running the build and deploy for one of the services, and that service is the web app that I've changed. This is something I kind of picked up in the last week or so, Bob. There's a nice action you can use. In fact, while that's running, if I just quickly go to my code, kind of show you my workflow. You got the main application services here. So basically,
the reason that you're building everything for the feature branch is because you don't know what's going to change inside of that feature branch. So you really just, from a safety point of view, like I just want to build everything and just have it all in one spot versus anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And okay, if I change one service, where do I go pull the other services from? Do I get them from the test branch? Do I get them from production? It's a lot easier just to take a cut from main, rebuild everything. There's a bit of a little bit of a wait time, but running in parallel, you don't really see that. You don't see that wait. But yeah, it was a cleaner cut and a cleaner approach to testing in isolation.
And if you were to say, because I believe all the services are part of this GitHub repo, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So if the services were on separate repos, which that's another approach as well, and that works out perfectly well. You would probably have to have something a little bit more intelligent in terms of having to go to Docker Hub and find the latest build that you want to use that's in, say, a testing environment or ready to go to production.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I just had a bit of a disconnect there. I was disconnected from Dreamweaver. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to jump in so we can see that's now running. We're still building that. Let's have a quick look. That's finished. So what we want to see in Octopus now is, rather than building every single service that's changed, we can see it's deployed 14.70 to test. And I've actually got approval on that. So kind of what my workflow is. Okay, testers, can you now go test this new service with what's currently on the main pipeline? Yeah, we can do that. We can see all the different versions. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to test that. I think if we take a look at the Kubernetes object status, we should have the IP address there, which is really cool. Having this information straight after the deployment with the object status check, I can go ahead.
That's huge. That to me is huge, especially. And we didn't really mention this on the last time, but the Kubernetes. One of the interesting things about Kubernetes is that with those YAML files, it could be creating or it could be updating Kubernetes objects. You're not 100% sure what it's going to be unless you have direct access to that cluster. And so what's really cool about that Kubernetes object status, said that too fast, is it will show you what it created and what it updated. And so you can kind of say, oh, that's really cool. It did this, it did that. I only had to change this minor thing, or this thing wasn't updated at all because there was no change. It's just really cool to be able to see all of that in one screen very quickly.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And understanding what's actually been deployed as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly assign that to me. So kind of, I'm the QA engineer now as well. Assign that to me. Okay to go to prod.
So you're
Let's
just full
proceed
on corrupt
now.
with this change at this point, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So that should just kind of finish up this release. Go back to my dashboard. Just double check. Oh, sorry. Have I just let's test?
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Yep. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
We'll
All good.
double check. So this is kind of where we get on to the kind of really the main reason why we're here. I know we've left it late for the back end of the session, but we kind of want to show you how to get there. So, okay, how do I then deploy that service to production without having to go through each kind of YAML and understand what needs to be deployed? I've got a release orchestration project here, and while it's running, I'll probably let Bob talk a little bit how it's kind of pieced together. But if I go into here, into the orchestration project, and go to the overview. I can see I've got a release created for me for .70, so I can go and deploy that to production. Now, in here in the orchestration project, it's actually deploying all my services. But not to worry, it's not going to go ahead and just deploy everything that's in test into production. Only the stuff that's approved and only the stuff that doesn't exist in production. And there's no hard and fast rule on this, is the Bob. We can customize this to kind of match any kind of coupling that you might have if you're microservices, especially version numbers. But I'll kick the deployment off to production. So I do have to do one thing as well. I'm going to hit deploy to production. And the first thing it's going to ask me for is a change request. My production environment is actually built into our ServiceNow change integration. So before anybody can deploy to production, there needs to be a change request. So again, just adding that extra bit of security and control around the deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this change. Might take me just a minute or so. Skip the...
As you work through all the different assignments and everything like that.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
it kind of glossed over it, but this is exceptionally important, especially when you have to deal with any sort of enterprise compliance, because what you often have to do is like, I need to deploy this app. I need to deploy all of these applications, all of these services up to production. And there are two schools of thought to doing something like that. You could do I want to get a individual change request for each of these applications, which, sure, it depends on your company policy of whether or not you want to do that. But with something like this, what we can have is a single spot to do this production deployment for us. And we can get one spot to get those approvals. And this was one of the core things that I wanted to do with this step that I wrote, which is I want to be able to get these approvals in one spot and not have to think about it ever again. The other thing for this particular step, the actual original reason why this step was created was I was talking to a customer. It was a couple of years ago when we created this step. And I was talking to a customer, and the customer asked me just this really simple question. He goes, how do I deploy all of the changes that are in my staging environment that are not in production? And I don't know which applications and which services have changed. And I was like, that's actually a really good question. And there wasn't a really good reason to do that. And on top of that, depending on your application, and depending on how you architected your microservices, if you adopted more of a REST-based approach versus a service bus or a queuing-based approach, you might have to deal with situations where you have to deal with dependencies and the order in which those deployments occur. And that was the other challenge that this particular customer had, is like, I need to know which ones to deploy, and they all have to deploy all in a very specific order for us. And again, this was the big reason behind that. And so what that step allows us to do is it will use the Octopus Deploy API, and it'll actually calculate. It goes, okay, what are all the versions, what are all the differences? And if there is a difference, I'm going to go ahead and promote it. If there isn't a difference, then go ahead and leave it alone. Or if Adam were to go into that step into the UI, if you'd pull up the UI, there are I don't know how many parameters I've added to that thing now.
Yeah,
It's well
yeah,
north.
yeah.
It's got to be at least 30 at this point. You can
It's certainly
customize it to
sprawled.
behave however you want it to behave.
As you can see here, I'll load that up. Yeah, we can. You can change the source environment where the deployment comes from, where it's getting deployed to. There's a context octopus of prompted variables. You can pass in variables to those projects. You had the what ifs, which was kind of a test run of that from memory.
Yeah, so that came about with customers wanted to be able to see what was about to go up to production, and then they actually wanted a manual intervention. So they wanted to run a what if for all of the applications and go, okay, what would have gone up there? And they wanted to make sure. It's just more of a layer of security, and also for approval to handle any sort of additional approvals if they needed to do anything like that. If you scroll up to one of the parameters in there, it was about the release version. And so let's see, child octopus release number. If you expand that out. So if you don't provide any value whatsoever, it's going to grab whatever the latest version in test or staging or whatever the source environment is. You can also specify a wildcard. So when you go into, say, a release, you can tell exactly when I wrote this because I was using 2020.
Yes.
When you go into so you say, I'm deploying all of my changes for February because maybe you do a 3-week sprint. And so you say, okay, my release this time is 2020.2. So I want to grab all of whatever is the most recent 2020.2, I want to promote that up there. Or for whatever reason, you have to have a very hyper-specific version. So it kind of gives you that flexibility on something like that. So I remember, I'm coming back to the original, one of the questions that was asked at the very beginning of this is, what's the best strategy to roll out a release for microservices? Release all the services combined or separately. By combined, I mean build each service, even if the changes are made in one or few services. So I don't think you should change the service itself. I don't think you should rebuild everything. What I think is you should use a tool or use this step as an example and only deploy the services that changed. That way you know that you're only changing one thing, because if you rebuild it, who knows what could happen? And you have to retest everything. Every time you rebuild something, even if you think nothing's changed, a variable could change inside of Octopus, a variable could change someplace else, anything in the process, some sort of configuration change. You're not 100% sure of what's going to happen. And so by just reusing the same thing over and over again, that's what you want to do. You want to have that known change.
Yeah, and that's just what's happened there. We deployed the orchestration. It didn't deploy any of the other services. It only deployed the web app because that's the only thing that's changed from test to production. And you could have had that without the test environment as well, and just had like you said, Bob, just the feature branch, and then go straight into production. And just in a question, I want to take that question. If the escape
yes, that is 100% true. If the deploy step is skipped because the package version is already in prod, for example, and it will skip any sort of variable transforms. Yes, if you change the variable, if the application, that service, in this case the web app, if it had any sort of other dependencies that you didn't know about specifically around transforms or anything like that for, say, the vehicle management API, you wouldn't know about that, and it wouldn't run that step. So yes, that can be a bit of a gotcha. So that's one of the disadvantages of not deploying everything at the same time. So it's definitely you have to pick the appropriate amount of risk for yourself. I generally typically recommend people use the wildcard feature. So let's just say hypothetically we were deploying now 2023.12. And I would say, okay, or if you're doing deployments today, 2023.12.14. I want to push everything that's changed today up to prod. And I would just do the wildcards. I don't care how many builds it's occurred. I just want to pull the latest change. But I only want to do for today. I don't want to have any unexpected changes or anything older that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks, Bob. And I think kind of lastly, I'll just finish on my demo here is just kind of going back to visibility of, hey, we know exactly what's running in test and in production, and we can quickly deploy anything that's changed using an orchestration type project. So I'm going to go back to my slides and kind of what I showed you. I showed you how to test changes in an isolated dynamic environment by also reducing the developer burden that he does not have to create that his own environment, his own namespace in Kubernetes. It's kind of handled for him, and that's using a mixture of the Octopus deployment process, runbooks, and then triggered from GitHub Actions. And this can be done with other build tools as well, not just GitHub Actions. It was just the easiest one for me to use this week. And then kind of how you reduce the cost, time, and risk deploying new service versions to production. The orchestration really reduces that risk with the deployments. It's kind of taken care of that the orchestration project is going to handle what's changed and only deploy the right services. And then lastly, I showed you the visibility that you get in Octopus Deploy, especially around microservices. So we got through all that. We had no issues with the Docker rate limit, so I'm happy about that. Any questions?
I saw one other question that came through about the creating 9 monolithic apps and deploying them to 25 countries. All the apps should be operated between them in a single country, and some of the apps need to be cross-country. Will microservices help in any way? That was an interesting question that I came through, and I was intentionally waiting until the end to discuss this because it wasn't really pertinent to the demonstration, but it was a good question. I honestly believe, I would think the multi-tenancy functionality within Octopus Deploy would probably be a better solution, where each country represents a tenant. So you'd still have the 9 monolithic apps or however many apps you decide to create, but you would end up having 25 tenants. In terms of should you have a monolith app versus a microservice app, the question that I come back to is are those 9 monolithic apps all going to be developed by the same team? And if they're all developed by the same team, breaking it out even further into more and more services, that leads just to more communication overhead that you have to deal with. But if they're all developed by 9 separate teams, or let's say you have 25 teams that's working on this, it might make sense to break it apart into maybe 25 applications or 50 applications or something like that, where every component can be deployed independently of one another without having to worry about any sort of conversations or, you just really agreeing upon the contracts versus trying to coordinate all the different releases or anything like that. Adam or John, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
My first thought was tenants. You already answered the question. Yeah. So as soon as I saw this question, I was like, tenants. That's exactly what tenants are for.
Yeah, same. Okay.
Awesome. Great presentation, guys. Thanks a lot. We've got a couple minutes left. If you have a question, feel free to submit it into the chat window. But in the meantime, I'm going to let you folks know about some of the things that you saw today. So Adam shared with you a repo, and this is the repo in question. I scrolled this along the bottom there. If you have a chance, you can scratch this down. In addition to that, we talked a little bit about approvals. You saw some integration with ServiceNow. This is the docs location for that if you're at all curious. We do have integration with other tools as well. ITSM is an integration aspect of approval process within Octopus, and you can read more about that on our docs. And then finally, we talked a little bit about conditions that you can invoke on steps, etc., that you can take a look at here. If you're at all curious, you can also check out our docs. Generally speaking, this is at octopus.com/docs. And if you have any other things that you want to chat with us about, feel free to reach out to our support. We've got a lot of ways in which you can reach us. But again, just to reiterate, this is the repo that Adam shared with y'all earlier. So if there aren't any other questions, doesn't look like we have any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. On behalf of Bob and Adam, thanks a lot for joining us today. We really appreciate it, as always. Happy New Year for everyone out there, and we will see you in the new one. Don't forget to check out our webinars page. We're going to be announcing a ton of webinars in the new year, and we really look forward to seeing you there. But until next time, Everyone, take care. Have a safe and happy holidays, and we will see you in 2024.
Actually, there's one last question that just came in
Oh,
while you're
yeah.
doing your
Okay.
little thing.
That built up to everything.
Yeah.
There we go.
And just,
This is
and
live.
I'll take that one. So yes is the simple answer. You can store all your deployment processes in a Git a repository, and you can actually configure. Thanks to John's work a few years ago, you can actually configure Octopus using Terraform as well. So you can have your deployment processes stored in a Git repository and in the UI, and keep the UI element as well. You can also configure Octopus via Terraform. I didn't do it on this one, and I kind of kicked myself after. So I was like, oh, I'm storing the deployment process in the database. Yeah, but you can store that in code as well. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Is there a minimum version for the step template? No, I would say the safest would be 2019 because that's when I first started writing it. So that would be the minimum version, 2019.1. So I was working on a 2019 version back when I was originally creating that step template. Nothing has really changed in the API since then, since it leverages the API very heavily. Obviously, the examples were 2020, so definitely any version 2020 or 2020.1 or newer is definitely going to be your safest bet, but I definitely know they'll work with 2019 because that's what I was originally writing it on.
Fantastic. All right, now, if there are any other questions,
Yes.
we can wrap up. That was a big preamble of Happy New Year, everyone. See you, and then all the questions come flying in.
Yep.
All right. There was one more here. Screen share was a bit blurry, which you can improve in upcoming webinars. Absolutely. Just so you know, we will be posting a recording of this to YouTube. It will be the full fidelity recording, so keep aware that we will be posting that to our YouTube channel. And if you're all curious, you can find our YouTube channel, which is at /octopusdeploy. I'll just quickly put a banner in here. If you're all at all curious, you guys can check out our YouTube channel, which is there. We will be posting a video recording of this webinar there. You can get the full fidelity experience there. So apologies on Adam's behalf for the blurriness. Maybe it's the bits coming over the UK. I don't know. Sorry, Adam. But yeah, we'll pull the full fidelity version. Like and subscribe on that channel if you're all curious. We post videos there at least 3 or 4 times a week, and we're really keen to highlight features there. So feel free to subscribe to our channel. Awesome. All right,
Thanks,
one
John.
last time. No more questions. All right, good.
Nope.
We can wrap things up.
All
Happy New Year, everyone.
Have a good
Have a
one.
safe 2023 remaining, and we'll see you in 2024.